Welcome to Zero Knowledge. I'm your host, Anna Rose. In this podcast, we will be exploring the latest in zero-knowledge research and the decentralized web, as well as new paradigms that promise to change the way we interact and transact online. This week, I host a spontaneous catch-up with Uma and Zaki. Tarun joins us partway through the interview as well. This was recorded near the end of the EthCC Paris week, and in it, we talk about the topics that were discussed at the events, our favorite talks, our favorite parties, and generally what the sentiment is in the space as we round out the week. Expect some spicy takes, off-topic rambles, inside scoops, and more. A bottle of fine French champagne may or may not have been polished off during this interview, so hope you enjoy. Now, before we kick off, the application to attend ZK Summit 10 is now open. This time around, we will be hosting the event in London. It's happening on September 20th. As always, we aim to bring together the top researchers and engineers working in ZK to share their latest research and new findings. Check out the show notes for the application form. Please note spots are limited and only folks who go through the application will be considered to attend. So hope to see you there. Now, Tanya will share a little bit about this week's sponsors.
Polygon Labs is thrilled to announce Polygon 2.0, the value layer for the internet. Polygon 2.0 makes mass adoption possible by offering users and developers unlimited scalability and unified liquidity. This mission is fueled by groundbreaking ZK innovations, including a first-of-its-kind ZK-powered interoperability protocol and the next generation of the industry-leading and widely adopted Plonky 2 proving system. Polygon 2.0 will change the way we experience Web3 by bringing the security and decentralization of Ethereum to the scale and usability of the internet itself. Polygon 2.0 and all of their ZK tech is open source and community-driven. Reach out to the Polygon community on Discord at discord.gg/0xpolygon to learn more, contribute, or to join in on building the future of Web3 together with Polygon. Aleo is a new Layer 1 blockchain that achieves the programmability of Ethereum, the privacy of Zcash, and the scalability of a rollup. If you're interested in building private applications, then check out Aleo's programming language called Leo. Leo enables non-cryptographers to harness the power of ZKPs to deploy decentralized exchanges, hidden information games, regulated stablecoins, identity products, and more. Aleo's incentivized testnet is now live. Participate as a developer, apply for a grant, or go for a bug bounty. Check out aleo.org/blog for more info. That's aleo.org/blog. You can also find the link in our show notes. So thanks again, Aleo. And now here's our episode.
I'm here with Zaki, Uma, and we might have a special guest coming soon to join us. And we're here in Paris near the end of the EthCC Paris week. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, so let's kick off with a little recap. You know, we're not quite at the end of the week, but we're far enough in that I think you might have some thoughts on what's been happening here. So just overall, generally, what's your week been like?
This has been a very sort of intense and chaotic week. There's a conference, there's like infinite side events. Every piece of my calendar had like 3 simultaneous things I was supposed to be at. Paris has been lovely. Paris accommodates a large, 10,000 blockchain people really easily.
Yeah, very similar experience. A lot of very fun side events. I think most people I've talked to have not even been to the conference or maybe don't even have a ticket. And the side events have been really the highlight, which seems to be always the case.
Yeah, EthCC is an event itself, but I kind of called it the week of it because at this point, I think even during that 4-day period, each day will have, 6, 7 other full day conferences happening. Yeah. Did you get a chance to check out any of the other ones?
Yeah, I went to MEV Day, which I thought was a really high quality event. There was a lot of discussion around like DEX design, intents, the future of like the transaction and MEV supply chain, which was interesting. And then there was 2 ZK days/events. And yeah, those are the ones that I've been to so far.
Yeah, I think a lot of investors also through events is a big thing here. So like of funds that I've either invested in my projects or I've LP in or like done all had events. And so it's just, and like one of the things that like the VCs have figured out is it's actually better if they like throw their events like parallel to a blockchain event that like everyone else is going to. And so the old thing, which is like everyone fly to San Francisco for 3 days or like this some resort or whatever. It's actually like no one really wants to do that anymore. So like half day event in or parallel to a crypto conference, you can get a lot more in.
That's interesting you say that, because we've actually experienced almost the opposite, where like we're so exhausted and you then try to tack on some sort of workshop or retreat, like where you're actually trying to solve a problem. And yeah, you're sort of out of it. I guess it works if you put it beforehand.
I did a topic specific retreat before.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then did some investor events sort of in parallel.
Yeah, I think before must be the trick, because we've tried in the middle.
Before worked really, really well.
All right. Is this your first time coming to the EthCC Paris week? What's your impression?
I mean, Paris has been really wonderful. People really warned me about the weather, but from my understanding, this year is really nice. So it's been super nice. And I think there's still like a lot of activity going on. Like, even though I think everyone acknowledges, we're in the bear market, there's still a ton of like activity going on, especially at the infra level of the stack. So, and there's a ton of people here, and I think a ton of excitement. So it actually feels really good. It's always very nice to hang out with like a bunch of very excited crypto people. I feel kind of bad for the Parisians, but it's really fun for us.
Yeah, we've really kind of taken over the city, or maybe some neighborhoods. I had a very strange experience yesterday where I was in a taxi that was stuck in traffic, and there was these like people biking by and scooting by. And at one point I saw Alex G from Matter Labs. He doesn't know this, but he will maybe now, just like scootering by. And then I was like, oh, that's funny. He's there. And on the same car ride, I see Merrick from Cello biking by. And then I get out of the cab and I see Jenny Pollock just walking through. And I'm just like, are we like, do we own this town at this point? Yeah.
Yeah. Again, Paris has been good because there've been plenty of space and venues and everything for side events. Food reservations have been easy to get. So it's just been like a very pleasant.
Yeah.
From that point of
And
view.
also, Uma, what you were just saying about like being warned about the weather, I think that was really last year.
Last 2 years.
Well, 2021, I was here for that, and I didn't find it too wild. It was like nice. It was warm. But I did hear about last year's. It was like, 36 degrees the whole time?
Yeah.
40 degrees?
40.
I don't know. What's this in Fahrenheit?
40. So it was like 90, 100 plus.
Oh, yeah. In the middle of a city. And like you can see, it's not like, yes, if you're next to the river, it's airy, but most of the streets.
I had gone to an event that was like in this restaurant that had no air conditioning, and it was like a greenhouse. And it must have been 115 degrees Fahrenheit inside of that. Yeah, it was like a sauna.
So this year, like everyone was warning everyone, like, oh, why would you go back there? But to me, this is what Paris in the summer is like in the past when I've been here. It's kind of nice. All right, let's crack in then to the themes of Paris. What are people talking about here this week?
So I think everyone has like a different experience. Like I sort of cross the world of like L1s, DeFi, Cosmos, ETH, DeFi, ETH staking. I've been talking a lot about, financialization of ETH staking yield and like the general like ETH staking stack that is being built, like where interoperability is going, value capture, and then intents have been, which I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about, have been, the intent apocalypse is continuing.
By the way, as you describe the scenes that you're in, it reminds me, when I was younger, I was in a lot of different music scenes. So I was in like the house scene, the drum and bass scene, the indie rock scene, the electro scene. This is very dating me to a certain era in time. And my favorite thing about it was I would like go from party to party in one night, and it would be like just a different vibe. Do you feel like that's kind of similar?
Oh, absolutely.
You're going to these different conferences, different dinners. You get to wear a different hat. Can you give some like texture to that? What are the different crowds like?
Well, so ETH staking has revived DeFi, and so like DeFi has sort of made a comeback, I think, at this point in the year, and it's basically been revived by ETH staking yield. And like different things you can do with ETH staking yield. In the past, in other events this year, like people hadn't really wanted to talk about DeFi. It was actually, I've found that like people wanted to talk more about applications in general in Europe than in the US. Like ETH Prague, it was the same way. It was like people were, but it's even more now.
Huh.
Yeah. And then like the infrastructure scene is like somewhat distinct from applications, DeFi, et cetera.
Which is more vibrant right now? Because there's sort of this, I mean, I've seen criticism that like, we spent so much time on infrastructure and almost like not enough time on application. There's like not enough users. There's not enough things for people to do. I don't know. Maybe I'm not in those circles enough.
I think one of the things that's been exciting is just like in Cosmos, a lot of new applications have been launching. So the application space has gotten a lot more exciting. I think in general, applications are coming back is like kind of like a theme, I would say. But, there's limits to it, right? Like there's only so many things you can build on top of ETH staking yield.
Yeah, I think one of the themes I've seen is like, as Zaki mentioned, like staking and then also restaking. Like a lot of people are pretty excited about Eigenlayer and like what restaking will do and the design space it opens and like the new stuff it brings. It's also funny being here with Zaki, who's from like, OG Cosmos, and seeing kind of like a lot of those themes and visions around app chains and shared security, but it's all coming to life on Ethereum as well with like app rollups. Now everything is basically an L2. Every app has their own L2. And then, you obviously have like shared security with Eigenlayer and restaking. So how do you feel about that, to see like the Cosmos vision, like kind of copy pasted?
Well, my vision related to Ethereum has always been not to kill Ethereum, but to cosmosify Ethereum, because I've always thought what Ethereum should be is basically Cosmos. But like part of the goal in like building Cosmos is to like lay the rail tracks that like Ethereum would travel. And I think over the last 2 years, like we've really seen Ethereum start to travel those. So like I kind of view the like the rollup stacks, especially more open source rollup stacks, app rollups, restaking with Eigenlayer is like the cosmosification of Ethereum.
Yeah, very much agreed. And then I think also another interesting theme we've talked a lot about is interoperability, especially in this very multi-rollup world. Like the interoperability situation is kind of a mess. And then you see, for example, with Cosmos, you guys thought ahead about that and you put it in protocol. It's called IBC. And then I think in the rollup world, there has also been a lot of talk about putting interop in protocol, because they are starting to realize it will be a huge problem. And I think you see this with like Polygon's ZK EVM L2 roadmap, where they have this unified liquidity layer for their new poll token across all their rollups. That's basically going in protocol to their ZK EVM rollup stack. There's been like some talk or proposal of like doing something similar with like shared validity for OP stack and like maybe other ecosystems. But I've heard the words unified liquidity a lot, which I interpret as putting interoperability in protocol.
Yeah. I think the Ethereum people have a lot to learn from the Cosmos experience, which the unified liquidity is not nearly as unified as you think.
It's so funny because you highlight sort of the Cosmos Ethereum connection, but I can't help but also bring up the Polkadot connection, because what I see is like 2017, 2018, Polkadot and Cosmos were kind of in a similar space, but they were distinct. They were really distinct in their vision. And what I see is like Ethereum is now both of them.
Oh, yeah.
And Cosmos took on a little bit of, I think, the Polkadot with the ICS stuff. And I think Polkadot took on a little bit of the Cosmos with the XCM stuff. But then you see like all of those ideas being really like brought to light with liquidity in Ethereum.
And so,
wild.
And Polkadot now supports IBC.
Cool.
So, Cosmos and Polkadot are the same thing now.
Good.
Yeah.
Those two projects had at their start the vision for this.
Yeah.
In the Ethereum's case, it's like adoption post launch, post, being very, very live, but with a lot more mind share. And I feel like at least in this snapshot in time, it feels like it's very powerful because you have so many people looking at it and working on it. But do we think there's also like openings for chaos because it's kind of piecemeal? Like there is no larger architecture. There is no IBC.
Yeah.
I mean, unless I guess the ZK rollup might be.
I mean,
I don't know.
It shocks and horrifies me that like every single rollup is writing their own bridge contract. Why is this not the same bridge contract? And then like the validity or fraud proof piece is just swapped based on like what your rollup is doing, right? It's insane. Conversations about security have been a big part of this for me too. But there's been a lot of industry-wide conversations about security as like a huge gating factor also at this event. And like, it seems like only a matter of time before there's a major bridge hack in the Ethereum rollup ecosystem. You know, there's been so many near misses.
That's interesting. Because I think the rollup narrative is all about, oh, this is so much more secure. We're inheriting security. Our bridge is totally safe. So I'm curious what makes you say that.
Rollups architectures enable in a future in which you can have stronger bridges that do more things, that enforce more properties than, let's say, the light client model of IBC. But that reality is we are nowhere close to it. And so I think that the reality is that like there's a lot of fragility in the cryptography layers of these bridges, in the software stack, especially on the ZK side. There's a lot of fragility in like the smart contracts. So yeah.
I'm not sure if you know this. You probably know this, Uma, but I don't know if you know this, Zaki. The fact that there's like kind of a huge conversation going on right now in ZK about security and that exact thing. Like each one of these systems potentially using different systems. So it's different types of rollups, different types of like using ZK. You're auditing them with like a pretty small group of auditors who can even handle this. Tools to audit that are still being developed, not quite there. And they're going to start having a lot of value attached to them. Like I'm nervous that like there is something that happens in one of these EVM kind of ZK EVM thing where it's kind of disastrous and it casts like shade on the whole scene. It's definitely something I'm worried about. And I don't really know what to do about it.
Well, I think Vitalik has a really good pragmatic take on this, which I think him and maybe Justin Drake have written about this on ETH Research, where they really advocate for two-factor kind of authentication for ZK rollups. So you have the ZK proof, maybe you even have multiple proofs, and then you also have some sort of TEE or SGX-based solution. One really interesting thing is I know Flashbots is really interested in using SGX for Suave, and they're doing a lot of work there. And so I think like they're going to do a lot of work there, and I think SGX will become, I know it's controversial, but like in the short term at least will become like a good kind of like two-factor stopgap for a lot of these security issues. And then I think one really nice thing about ZK is that at the end of the day, these ZK circuits are just functions, right? They're like f of x equals y. There's a really clear spec. And so compared to a smart contract, actually, for a ZK circuit, you can have many different implementations because the spec is so well specified and it's a pure function. Whereas like for a DeFi protocol like Euler or something, there's state. So like it's hard to imagine how a two-factor would really work there. Yeah, but for ZK, you can have many different implementations. I kind of view it as like client diversity. And I think that's something that also the ZK industry, maybe they're not talking about it a lot. I've heard it a little bit, but I think will become more prevalent and more important.
So I had a conversation recently with an auditor on the show, and we talked about like under constrained ZK systems, which is like, that's a place where a vulnerability can happen, but that sometimes teams will do that because they're sort of like, there's going to be some sort of validator set that's going to make choices about governance, about upgrades, about stuff like that. So like there is some backstop that is supposed to be decentralized, but that, you know, means they can be a little bit more loose and fast with some of the constraint stuff. I don't know if like, that still doesn't make me feel super confident.
I do think as someone who has deployed like a ZK protocol to production, like our protocol or ZK like client is running in production, honestly, running it in production feels a lot better to me than having to manage the keys of a multi-sig. Because you have that like math and cryptography. So yes, while thinking about circuit security is like stressful, I think the alternative is that, you have like, I don't know, some like maybe 3 out of 5 multi-sig. You have to worry about keeping the keys safe. You have to worry about who has access to your AWS account or wherever you're running it. You have to worry about not losing the keys. And so I think compared to the trade-off, actually, like if you just even viscerally feel it deploying a system, it feels a lot better than just like a pure multi-sig. And I do think like it's important to not be purist. Like I think it's important to have like both, kind of like this validator set plus ZK, or like ZK plus like TE plus, you know, all these methods. Like security is very additive. And I think that's like important to, you know, be okay with and think it's valuable.
I actually want to talk a little bit about the big announcement by Gnosis. Because I'm just curious, like Gnosis released this Gnosis Pay, And I know that Succinct is now, it's deployed, right? It's part of the bridge. It's not the full bridge. This is what I kind of learned recently. It's like there's a number of multi-sig signers, but now Succinct, a ZK agent, is one of them. Yeah. Are you also involved in the new product?
I actually don't know too much about Gnosis Pay. I think it's super cool. I think it is like one of those applications that we really need. So I'm really excited they're working on it. And personally, like we use Gnosis Chain a lot as like our test net. So I really like using the chain. But yeah, we are involved. Succinct is involved in securing the Gnosis bridge. So like DAI is locked up on Ethereum. It's minted as XDAI. That's like the gas token on Gnosis. And then we help secure that through our ZK-like client. But yeah, Gnosis Pay, from my understanding, is like an L2 on top of Gnosis to make it even cheaper. But yeah, it seems really cool product-wise. I want to try it out.
Yeah, Zaki, you and I got kind of like Gnosis pilled last time in Prague.
I continue to
Frederica was telling us all the stuff they were doing, and we're like, well, how is it that you're doing all of these things?
The infrastructure that they've built is like seems like a breakthrough. Like the ability to like actually have something that you can use at a payment terminal, like just like boop your credit card, boop your phone, and have a signature get relayed like through like an account abstraction, like you're integrating account abstraction directly into the payment infrastructure, which is just such an amazing piece of infrastructure building from the best infrastructure building team in the game, which has been Gnosis.
Cool. Any other themes? Maybe themes even like outside of what you normally pay attention to?
I think just it's been so reinforced that L2s are the new thing. I think in Ethereum world, like so many people have adopted the OP stack. They're making their own rollups. Like especially in the infrastructure world, it just feels more and more consensus that building your own L2 is like the way to go, which is very interesting.
I mean, it's been interesting, you know, in 2019, the exchanges were all adopting the Cosmos SDK to build their exchange chains. And
Finance.
now it's the story is, you know, Mantle and Bybit and Base both doing OP stack.
Is OP stack is the new Cosmos SDK /
Yeah.
Okay.
It is.
Is there, but like, as we say this, all the other big L2 projects. I mean, doesn't ZK Sync have a new thing coming out? Arbitrum probably is going to do it.
Yes, Arbitrum.
So they
is
all
Orbit.
created a Cosmos SDK / Substrate / whatever, like this building environment framework.
There's a building environment framework for
to a roll kit, I guess, falls under that category.
Yes, which brings the Cosmos SDK to Celestia, to rollups in general.
Okay.
I mean, so like that's very much the narrative here. But DYDX chain is the other side of this, like, which is an L2, which was an early adopter of an L2, which said, I've gone to the limits of what we can do in the L2 world, and now we need a Cosmos chain.
Well, also, I think another theme that we haven't talked about is, speaking of the limits of the L2 world, I think there's a lot of DA layers that are popular right now. Celestia, Avail, I know Espresso, I think, is also EigenDA is another one. Yeah, Espresso is also going to make their own DA layer. And really, like, the true cost of making a rollup on Ethereum is putting your DA on Ethereum. That is the main cost. And yeah, there's like seems to be a ton of new solutions for DA, for these like Validiums that are settled to Ethereum, have their off-chain DA, which I think is pretty interesting.
What I would say about that, I think another theme that I've seen on this event and in the future in other events this year is the block space surplus theme. Like we have so much more block space now
than we thought we would.
Than demand is.
For sure.
Like, you know, you have these rollups as a service, you have these alt DA layers. Like we can produce petabytes of block space, right? Like so much block space now. No one has a good answer really for like what's going to consume that. Like the recurring theme is gaming. Like everyone's
you need something that uses a lot. Yeah,
the games are going to come and the games are going to rescue us from the block space surplus.
It's so funny. I have heard from other people that there's so much happening in games. I don't know if I've just been at the wrong events or looked in the wrong direction at a certain time. But for some reason, it has not hit my radar correctly. Like I've seen cool experiments, or I mean, maybe this is something I should be exploring on the show. Like I feel like maybe there's just places I've not been looking.
On the gaming front, I think like one of the biggest things that like we in the blockchain space don't really appreciate is like how much bigger gaming is. Gamescom, which is going to be in Cologne in Germany in like a month, that's like 400,000 people.
Oh my God.
Right? Like we are like, oh, we were like, our like 10,000 blockchain people showed up in Paris and we like took over the city. And like, like a GDC or a Gamescom or like that, these things are like orders of magnitude larger. So like, I think like one of the things that like is interesting about the gaming stuff, and like there seems to be like quite a bit of innovation, and there's projects in the Cosmos ecosystem that are going, like Saga and Argus, that are going after these markets, and like they don't make a big splash here because like what's the point? Like, oh, like we like have, it's not like DeFi where like a couple hundred accounts can move $100 million. Like gaming is like the long tail of users. So if it works, it's not going to be because we convinced the crypto people to use this. It's like we went to Gamescom, we went to that like gamer audience, we got on people's Xboxes, we got on people's phones, like, and that like onboarded it.
Except sadly, right at this very moment, the word crypto in gaming land apparently is quite tainted. I don't think they like it. I think they find it quite yucky. And yeah, I think there needs to, I think for that to happen, the thing is, the marriage makes so much sense because those games are creating their own economies anyways. Like they're creating these little, you know, inner game trading, all this stuff, and it can get kind of sophisticated, and it's totally just living on one company's servers. It's kind of ridiculous. The users don't own it. The game shuts down at some point. People have like put so much time and energy into this. It's quite sad. It's like having a career that like at some point is just taken away from you. I mean, gaming is maybe not the healthiest, but you know what I mean? Like,
it's a huge
it's like people
part of
put
so many
so
people's
much
lives.
time into it, and it's kind of crazy. Like but at the same time, I think crypto went too far on the other side. It was like, let's gamify it and pay you immediately. And you're just going to like mine and farm and do these things like in game just to like get immediate tokens. And it was just such a like immature model. You need an economy. You need a community. You need like people who give a shit about what you're doing.
I mean, a lot of feedback that Similia has gotten from like investors is that like we should be gamifying it aggressively. And I felt that it's too early.
Yeah.
Trust is more important than like, oh, like look here's, but like I am thinking also of things we could do.
Yeah. Although gamifying what you're talking about sounds more like gamifying Robinhood or something. It's like you're gamifying a financial app.
Robin is quite gamified.
But I think of games proper, and like they hate crypto, but the combination is so inevitable, and yet they have this sort of bad taste in their mouth that we need to fix.
Yeah, they hate crypto now, but I feel like all this stuff, they'll like crypto when it, you know, has its time in the sun again. So I feel like in general, I've seen this. I live in San Francisco, and like, you know, I go to parties and I tell people I work in crypto, and I get these like horrified looks. Like, honestly, people are quite rude about like, oh, what is crypto? But then you just know that all these people, you know, whenever like crypto takes off again, they'll be like, oh my God, like crypto's amazing. And in general, I feel like the outside sentiment tracks like crypto's adoption quite like closely. So I'm sure they can have their mind change, or like I'm very optimistic about that.
So what worries me about is like the blockchain surplus is arriving today, like now, right? Like Celestia is launching soon, Eigenlayer is launching soon. Like this massive surplus is like coming right now. I believe gaming can work, but it has to be like a little bit more organic. Like you can't just like knock out a partnership with some giant game dev company or like some giant publisher like Activision or whatever and be like, oh, we've just like produced enough transaction volume to fill the blocks, right? I mean, I've been following what's been happening like on Sui, right? And right now, like, oh, they have like this like very simple like mobile phone puzzle game that is like producing an enormous amount of transaction volume, and it's great. Like, you know, they have an enormous amount of block space, and they have to find something to do it, and they've created a little game that does it, and they have like, you know, tokenized incentives, and they've gamified things and stuff like that, but
it's still short term.
It feels very short term.
Like mobile games. Yeah.
Whereas like, you know, what teams like Argus and Topology and I'm sure there are like lots of others. Lattice, Keystone, I think also. Yeah, there's like all of these teams are like really trying to build like authentic experiences.
The thing about that authentic experience, though, I feel like what has to happen is it's so hard to work in the short-term mentality of like create company, get investors, get return in X years, short-term. Like that kind of thing. Like if you really had like the blockchain native game growing over time, you'd have to have people doing it for nothing for a really long time and like genuinely having people who are just like into it. Cause like this is sort of the, going back to my music scenes or whatever. It was like very indie. It was very like, you had to have people who were genuinely into it because that was what made it cool. And It took a long, and it's almost like the longer it was underground and before becoming cool, the more like backstory you had. I mean, I could actually give something closer to blockchain. It's like the crypto anarchists, the Bitcoin early people, they worked under the radar for many, many years before they were recognized. And I think that legacy adds sort of like strength to a community.
Oh, yeah.
And in the environment we're in right now, you want the big hit real quick. I mean, then you sell out immediately. Like like you're gonna get the pressure to gamify so quickly, and then you don't have any of that backstory. You don't have the legend. You don't have the messiah who disappears. You don't have any of that.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff is descended from the Dark Forest team, which does have a little of that organic mythology.
That definitely.
Lattice, Argus, they're all descended from the Dark Forest team, right? So
I mean, they never monetize. I mean, they did some NFTs, but I don't think they never
monetized.
They
monetized by like starting companies.
Well, and do Xerox Park. I mean, that's so kind of giving. It's very altruistic. I feel still like it's about kind of like funding other people.
What I will also just say about the gaming stuff is, so like I do think that we're gonna have like I think there are applications coming that can like Gnosis Pay, like gaming, like. That can like actually consume this massive amount of block space that we've created. But I think there's a gap.
I want to bring it back for a minute to Paris. What was the best talk that you've seen?
I am going to more talks at those like latter half of the week because like there's a lot of Cosmos stuff. So I'm doing like Osmocon, Modular, Nebular, which are all like sort of Cosmos adjacent. And so I'll go to more talks there. ETHLand, I didn't go to that many talks.
There was a lot of panels, which I think I find pretty interesting because it feels like more interactive, more live, like more fresh, more spicy also. So MEV Day was actually just all panels. And yeah, those were really fun, but it wasn't like talks.
I did some of the talks for DeFi Security Summit, which was like, there were some really good talks about trying to improve like the way we interact with audits, like, how hard is it to like know what code is actually got audited. There was a really good talk on that. Yeah, like DeFi Security Summit, I think was like one of the sleeper events that like some subset of the population got to, but like didn't get hyped up. There were no like big fancy announcements, but like a lot of conversations about security in Paris.
One of my favorite talks actually happened today at ZK Paris. So we're recording this on the Thursday. ZK Paris was happening today. This is an event that the ZK Validator and Geometry put together. So I'm biased, but Kobe did this little intro at the beginning, sort of showing what a user in 2020, I think it was 24 or 25, could do using some of the tools in the ZK stack and like the different things that you could be doing if you wanted to win at Dark Forest. I think that was his model. And it was this really, really useful image to just see what a user would need to do. And then also like, you still see like, okay, there's a lot of clicks. You're kind of going through it. Are there ways to even like make that more efficient? And I feel like it was a beautiful picture. Like if that happens, like a lot of the companies he referenced are like companies that are building right now. So like those products don't exist yet. Those products they might pivot. We don't know if they're going to be used in the way they're expected. But even to have that, I hadn't actually seen anything like that at all in the ZK space ever. So anyway, in that video, we're going to have a video for it soon, but
yeah,
I loved it.
I think another thing has been account abstraction. Seems to be really breaking through. Like Vitalik gave a talk about it. But like, I think we have to come up with something new to call it, which may be just intense, which might be better branding, but these sort of like, augmented wallets, right, is a big part of it. And like the too many clicks problem, the too much waiting.
Yeah.
UX, I think, has also been like a big, there's probably more of a focus on UX now than I think than in previous eras of blockchains.
Yeah, strongly agree with that. Yeah, I have heard a lot of stuff about account abstraction and then also like the UX of interop. And I think everyone is kind of now on the same page that it really sucks. Like it needs fixing, whether that's like putting it in protocol or using account abstraction or whatever to fix that, I think has been definitely another theme, which I think is really positive for like actually getting real adoption.
All right, we did best talk. What about best party? Could be best party, best crowd, but it could also be like best venue.
I mean, the food has been amazing in Paris.
Just generally across the board.
I didn't go to any of the catacombs parties, but those were pretty cool. I just watched. I saw the photos, but there were a bunch of catacombs events. Paris is generally, I think, a pretty good city with a lot of good venues in it, and I think we've had a lot of classy, less generic blockchain events.
I love how in Paris you can be walking around doing a walking meeting, you turn the corner and there's this very historic, very beautiful, amazing building, and you're like, oh my God, I need to know about it. And it's literally every corner.
So there was a party I'd wanted to go to but didn't make, which was in the Eiffel Tower.
The ZK conference tomorrow is in the Eiffel Tower.
Whoa. That's where I've been around it in the past. I've not gone up to it in a really long time, but I was like, oh my God, there's something you can do in it. But I didn't make it. I did go to the Eigenlayer drinks dinner, which had a view. It was amazing. The venue was fine, but the view from the venue was the river and the Eiffel Tower, and it was all green, and it was blue sky. It was just incredible.
I mean, because I got here early, I got to do Bastille Day in Paris. And
the Bastille Day.
Yeah.
This is their big celebration.
Big celebration. They do huge fireworks show in front of the Eiffel Tower. The French take fireworks very seriously. They budget for fireworks at the federal level.
Yeah.
It is a matter of honor that the Paris Bastille Day fireworks show be ridiculous. And so
wait, someone just walked in.
In a puff of smoke.
In a puff of smoke. We didn't say his name 3 times, but we could have.
We're not in New York, which is a city that is literally covered in smoke nowadays.
I know. Why?
I mean,
but not anymore.
Not just Canada, who I think we need some reparations from personally. I distinctly think the U.S. deserves reparations from Canada for all this smoke. But secondly. No, New York is in this very weird state with weed legalization where they the state fucked up and they didn't come up with the licensing agreements, which was the tax law for how to split the revenue. Then basically they said it wouldn't be illegal for 6 months to be unlicensed and sell weed. And there's been this mad frenzy to buy any retail space and turn it into a smoke shop.
Oh my God.
But also the smoke shops are all selling drugs, in general.
Oh dear.
So it's everything went from everything was illegal to nothing is illegal in a very large city overnight. So it's been kind of crazy.
So welcome to the show, Tarun.
Yeah,
very nice intro there.
I'm sure it had a lot to do with the rest of the episode.
We had not been talking about New York. We had actually been talking about Paris. But yeah, welcome. It's nice to see you.
Great to be here.
Just to kind of bring you up to date on what we've been talking about, we have done a little bit of a Paris recap, talked about some of the themes. But now I'm really curious, what's your Paris recap now that you're here?
I read somewhere that someone wrote this on Twitter, but I thought it was a great summary, which is the future of crypto is off-chain. Is a lot of the announcements have been pseudo off-chain stuff. There are things that are on-chain components, but they're unsettled on-chain, but there's a lot of off-chain logic around them.
That's probably so true for the short term.
I've been thinking about it. I think a theme of the talks I'm doing later in the week is that kind of we figured out a lot of the the limits of the on-chain pieces and pre-consensus, peer-to-peer layer, order flow, order flow, intent dissemination, all of these things are the future. And so yes, I agree with that take that that like trying to do the off-chain things, but get them to be decentralized, to get them to be constrained, to get them to be secure, I think is a big, because like the past of crypto is off-chain too, which is like everybody uses centralized exchanges.
So I'm going to posit a spicy question for you, from my perspective, at least it's spicy, which is the idea of doing a lot more off-chain logic that settles or has some proof of correctness on chain is actually really bad for the Cosmos app chain thesis, because in some ways the chain itself needs to be like as secure as possible for the settlement layer. You can't have like 500 chains with varying levels of security and doing like all this off-chain logic and treating it at 1-to-1 on many different chains, right? Like doing the same thing on different apps.
Is this the bull case for Polkadot?
Bull case for roll-ups in some sense, right? Because like they're still going back. But like, yeah, how do you feel about that? Do you think the off-chain version of the world impacts the pure app chain? I call them the pure and adulterated app chain theses. The adulterated one is the roll-up one because it's not the true.
One of the things, though, that we've seen right now is that the people who are like flexing decentralized off-chain the hardest are like people like DYX, who needed the Cosmos stack in order to decentralize the off-chain components that no one else could give them how to. So like,
but isn't their order matching still done off-chain?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And they're using the Cosmos stack to facilitate decentralizing that off-chain system. I think there's some version of the app chain future that like is becoming less relevant because of like moving to this like intent-centric world and stuff like that. But you have a lot of people building, like they need a toolkit for building decentralized off-chain pieces, and the Cosmos toolkit becomes very relevant there.
Can I ask you one of the questions we just were talking about? Best party, and that can be because of crowd or location.
Honestly, maybe it's because I've been in this industry long enough now.
No parties are good for you?
I kind of am like, all crypto people kind of have shitty parties.
Oh, no.
They're just like, I feel like the NFT
was better?
rage was a scourge on this industry because it allowed people to go for like the least common denominator, where they went for the shittiest anything as long as it was golden looking. And so,
and it stuck? Do you think it's still there? Don't you think the tide went out with that?
I don't think the party planning, event planners have adjusted. I think they're still living and throwing these parties as if it's like NFT. It just doesn't feel, it feels like pre-NFT boom was a different universe. Then trashiness and like Miami-ness was like kind of somehow became acceptable everywhere, always. And
were you at the blockchain conference in like New York in 18?
Yeah.
With the Lambos.
When Arthur Hayes showed up with Lambos.
So I don't know what you're talking about exactly. Was it classy? Because I do not remember that time.
This is theoretically a developer conference. Right?
EthCC. Fair.
Mainnet and Consensus are like money conferences. Yeah. Right? Like money conferences have been trashy since the beginning of history. Okay. That's almost their definition.
Okay.
But developer conferences being trashy it really was accelerated by NFT. Okay,
this is a bit of a question. I really don't mean this in a bad way, but it's like, is EthCC still a developer conference itself? Because I think there's deeper technical conferences happening around it. I just don't know if it's there.
I can't say because I haven't been to EthCC, but I feel like all the events and side events we've been to have been very developer focused. So yes, there's literally not one app specific side event that I felt like was super popular. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm not sure I totally agree with that. I think that Paris still has a lot of like nebulous stuff, like Web3 fashion shit, and like there was like tons of parties of that form.
Like that.
I was not invited to the Web3 fashion parties.
And there's a lot of like that type of stuff that like I think those of us who are focused on adding numbers instead of adding apes are kind of avoid on purpose.
I feel like, is there anyone here who's into apes? Actually, you lived in New York, man. You were like the closest to this thing.
I know. This is why I'm saying I can see across the chasm of like this exists, and like we're all ugly. Very oblivious because these things are happening, but we're just like it's not.
Do you think we're sliding towards it though?
No, I just think that like the trash, like remember, like the event planners for these things are shared. And a lot of them are picking the same venues. They're picking the same whatever fucking shit DJ. And
Let's
it's
not
just
shit on the event planners, man. I'm an event planner.
No,
it's
no.
hard.
True.
All right.
Sorry.
It's hard. You're trying to do events in different cities, like all over the world.
I
It's
agree.
Very,
Yeah.
very challenging.
It's fair. Sorry. I didn't mean to give them a hard time as much as the fact that there's a lot of repeated effort.
Okay, now I have a more superficial question. What was the best swag on that theme? We actually
I find swag cringe. There's actually like one amazing one amazing party I went to where they said you're not allowed to wear any company logos, t-shirts or whatever, and there still were all these people doing that.
Oh, wow.
I thought that was funny to me. I was like, wow, it became like the burned band book.
Okay, so you just dissed swag, but wait.
I was planning on going to that party, but then I got back to my hotel room to change, and then I went to sleep.
Okay. Okay, but can I still ask the question to the non-swag hater? I mean, I think if teams are trying, that's cool. Uma and I've seen a cool
socks
piece of
are
swag.
always handy and useful.
For sure.
Water bottles, always handy and useful.
Yeah.
I take it back. There's actually one swag piece that I thought was very on point and very good, which was at MEV Day, which is hosted by Frontier. There was a sunscreen from MEV Protect, and I thought that was just like both useful, so like accretive, and not trashy in that you like look like you're in San Francisco.
I didn't actually see this for real, but I saw like on Twitter with like some random Twitter person. They tweeted like, what was it? What do they like here in France? The little colorful a Macron with scroll on it. Yeah. That was cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Food is great. Yeah, food is good.
Yeah, and the EthCC did its soap.
Oh, soap. Okay, and I think we saw a really good one. And I saw a good one.
There was these Eigenlayer Nike Air Force Ones that had the Eigenlayer logo on it. Tarun's cringing, but I thought it was really cool.
I thought it was cool too. You know why it was cool? Because it just looked like cool design, and you did not notice the logo until you looked closely. It was actually cool.
Yeah,
I want that now.
I saw someone from Eigenlayer with it, and I think as long as the one I saw had no text, but then I saw a picture online that looked like it had text, and I would.
You don't want that.
I don't. The text is like a little too.
But the thing is, if you have no text, why is that company like? How does the company
it's a cool logo.
justify
It's an amazing
it?
logo.
Well, just the colors. You have to have. I mean, the Eigenlayer words logo. It doesn't have to have the tagline, maybe, but.
Yeah, I might be the wrong person to talk about this. It's like my company gives out swag. I have absolutely nothing to do with
Gauntlet had a cool orange cap. I saw that.
I just like don't. I just like
but
I
haven't
never
seen
want to
you
wear
it.
this. And sorry, I know Zaki is here, sitting here wearing a piece of swag that he can describe.
I'm just, the sommelier swag distributor. I just have a bag of sommelier swag that I.
It's in a near bag. That's amazing.
It's in a near bag. I will also say, I mean, like, I do feel like Eigenlayer has really like broken out from like a momentum and branding point of view. I remember I've been a Shriram fanboy since 2018, but it's sort of interesting. It's like my take on Eigenlayer has been all of the challenges around like the business, value accrual, product. None of these things have been solved, but we've really like momentum, vibes, branding have been really strong.
But Tarun, the other day you were telling me about some kinds of swag you really like, which are kind of like bags that like middle-aged women in New York would be carrying around.
Yeah. So I love the irony of carrying bags, although I hide the logo as much as possible. In fact, sometimes I put duct tape over the logo, and I'd rather. And I like carrying bags that, just look like you're going out to the beach or to yoga or something. Yeah. And just because it feels very ironic to do that. But I think some of the best swag is candles.
Ooh. Although you have to get good ones. I've seen those, but like cheap candles.
No, not cheap candles.
You don't want that either. No.
You want like a Byredo or something like that. You don't want some.
Yeah. I'm actually sitting next to an Anoma bag. It says intent-centric architecture. And actually, this is a topic we have not fully dived into on this show yet. And I feel like since we're all here, we might as well do it. We're talking about themes of the week, things that have been talked about. Would you say, I know that like at the research day, that was the...
Well, before we even talk about research day, Uma got a shout out from Brian Armstrong for her talk about intents on Twitter.
Intents are going mainstream. A public company CEO knows about intents and suave. We're really gonna make it.
Crazy. But yeah, let's kick this off, shall we?
I mean, there's no better person to start than
Amazing.
Uma, I think.
Yeah, I think so Zaki was the original one who intent pilled me. And just from a group chat.
Zaki is a super spreader.
So it's the thing, we've been thinking a lot about interop, better ways to deal with interop, mostly from a security perspective, but then also from a UX perspective. And when Zaki had mentioned this intense concept, I just went down the rabbit hole, and it's one of those ideas that seems like more and more obvious in hindsight in a way. I think you saw throughout this conference a lot of teams converging towards it. Like Uniswap X, for example, is this like intent-based RFQ, or request for quote, for, trades. And then I think Skip recently released this like Cosmos DEX aggregator, which kind of also looks like an intent-based system. So you see it across ecosystems, you see it across domains, you see it like single domain, you see it across rollup. And so it seems like a lot of those ideas that we were even discussing like 2 to 3 months ago at that research day, where there was a talk I gave on intents and account abstraction and Suave and cross-chain bridging and how all those things are related and how all those things are important for UX. A lot of those like visions are coming to life, which is like actually really cool to see.
I have such a question here, because when you talked about the rabbit hole, because like I think for a lot of people, the intent conversation research, the rabbit hole is your talk. So what was, and like other talks that happened on research day. So like what were you looking at in building this? Like who were you reading?
I think I was reading like Zaki's messages in group chats. And I think also a lot of it was just, I think I was in this really interesting spot thinking a lot about interoperability, but then I think also just personally, I care a lot about UX, and we'd been thinking a lot about like how existing wallets suck and existing bridges suck. And so I was just at this intersection of like, personally, I was like, oh my God, I have to bridge to operate my protocol, and I dread it. And then, also I like work at the infra layer. So I just was thinking a lot about those ideas. And then honestly, it was a lot of like me and my co-founder just getting in a room and like jamming and being like, this cannot be the way. Like this has to be better. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of like source material. Like to this day, I think a lot of people ask me, oh, what should I read about intents? And yeah, I think the talk is a good start, but there isn't a lot of written material. So I hope that changes.
There is Georgios's post on the Paradigm blog, which is a very good intro to intents.
This is since those talks, though, right?
Since those talks.
Like in the last few months.
Yes. There's Georgios's Paradigm Intents blog that came out after the talks.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like if people ask where like this intense conversation came from, Anoma started 2 years ago, like Chris Goes, who, built the system that like OpenSea used for their marketplace, which is essentially like a proto-intent system. Mm-hmm. He built IBC. Yeah. Like he was like 2 years ago, Zaki Intents. And I was like, I don't really know what you're talking about. But like really for me, what it was the experience building Sommelier, because I'd never built an end user dApp before. Like Tom is like my first end user dApp. Yeah. And then we like realized this enormous problem that people had, which is like, I want to use your app, but I don't, like, how do I bridge? How do I like, where do I go? And like all the answers that we've given people are like, people can like struggle their way through it, but like, and like, so people use the app, but like, you can't just like expect
and you feel like the intent centric architecture, something like an intent would be better in a system like that, but you can't do that yet.
Yeah. And I think like one of the other things that I think is intriguing about Uniswap X, which is their new RFQ system, is it very much is like in my mind of like what you could build without solving any of the researchy problems around intents. So like we have like the research problems of intents are like programmable privacy. There's like a programmable privacy problem that we don't really have a solution to. There are like, how do you do price discovery? How do you do like multi-chain settlement? Like all those things are like the research problems of intents. And like, I think Uniswap, I think one of the things that's like intriguing about Uniswap X is just like build the thing that like you don't have to solve any of those research problems to build and like put that out there.
Just want to do a quick call out because what you're talking with Chris's work, like we actually, Tarun and I just did an episode.
Came out today, I think.
Yeah, or like this week. And so we're gonna put the link to that if people want to hear a little more of that backstory.
One thing I guess that's worth calling out about this is intents do feel like the first piece of infrastructure that people care about from purely UX reasons versus some like theoretical efficiency gain reason. Like most things that people have always proposed infrastructure wise are like efficiency gain, or it's cheaper gas wise, or it's easier to do X, Y, or Z action. But I think the interesting thing about the intent architecture in some ways is it has a lot of empirical proof that it works, even though like the empirical proof it works is not the one that people would cite. People usually would cite the fact that 0x, which still runs RFQs, is sort of, non-controversially has done significantly less volume than non-intent based systems and DEXs. And so people always point out that as something not working. But the fact that OpenSea worked for many years is a much better signal that like this is an architecture that people like. Now, one interesting thing about Chris is I feel like he did not come up with this architecture for UX reasons. He came up with it for completely opposing reasons. In fact, his research day talk gives his like philosophical reasons for why he thinks this architecture is the best. And it's exactly almost anti-UX. He has like an example in that talk of a problem that finding a fixed point of a particular system, and finding a fixed point of that system is actually like a very hard computational complexity problem. Like it's like the opposite of UX. So it's like funny how something that started for pure reasons is actually now being co-opted for UX reasons, but perhaps that's a much better way of getting it built.
UX is the go-to-market for intents. No, I do think it does help with scalability, though. Like, I feel like a lot of the reasons Uniswap X, or the Uniswap people cited they did Uniswap X, was for moving a lot of the computation off chain, and like, saving users gas costs and things like that. And the RFQ system implicitly does do this, right? Because you have these like sophisticated actors who are the fillers or the quoters who, are monitoring the price on Binance or wherever else. And they're very sophisticated. They're quoting you a price, and they're doing a lot of off-chain logic. So I do actually think it does help quite significantly with, scalability and basically leveraging off-chain compute to do like on-chain settlement.
A lot of the problems that we'll get are like going to be like the key features of like sort of blockchain development in the next 3 years have not previously really been hyped up. Like, I think a lot of the problems are going to be things like, how do you do exception handling? Like, how do you do like, this bridge, like the chain halted or the bridge halted or like the keys disappeared. How do you deal with exception handling? How do you deal with routing? Like, hey, like my portfolio, like I hold this set of assets, but I want to use this app and I need to like get into the entry asset. So like each sommelier seller has like an entry and exit asset, which is like might be a stable coin or ETH or WETH or something like that. But you have a user and they hold like all of these liquid stake tokens, like LSTs and all this stuff. How do they transform that? How do they do that in an efficient manner? These are going to be the big problems, rather than just like, how do we make more block space? Because I think like we basically have made more block space than anyone really needs right now.
Yeah, and I think an interesting point, sorry, it's a tiny tangent, but it's towards this view of exception handling, which is the multi-chain bridge hack. I put maybe bridge in quotes, hack in quotes also. Yeah. But I think it's kind of this type of case where like, imagine if the contracts had some exception handling on bridge keys compromised. We actually have never really thought about this in this industry at all, especially because multi-chain's whole thing was like, we use MPC, don't ask who the signers are. And I think like one important thing to think about is people building this technology is there's also people who can like misuse it.
Why? How? Like,
well, they're
who
using it for
it?
Multi-chain. Misuse acronym MPC to be like, oh look, we're really safe, we're doing some MPC thing across multiple signers, and of course you have no way of even knowing how if all the signers are the same computer, let alone like same subnet, right? Like,
yeah, I think this is why ZK is actually really nice, because I think we should strongly advocate, or it should be totally unacceptable to have a ZK circuit that's closed source. Obviously, it's like a smart contract. It's like basically the same as like any Solidity code. But yeah, with ZK, you can't really misuse it. Like anyone can look at your circuit and find bugs. Because with MPC, a lot of the correctness of it relies on like the infrastructure, which is generally has to be closed source, right? Like, oh, what AWS box are you running your MPC signer on? Whereas with ZK, if your circuit's open source, then you can't abuse it this easily. So I think, for example, combining ZK plus a multisig or ZK plus MPC or ZK plus MPC plus SGX or something, that's when it gets like really powerful. It's just like an additional layer that can't be abused as easily.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from your vantage point, do you think this, I'm going to keep calling it a hack, even though like obviously it's like this weird security incident. That's probably a better word. This security incident, which, you know, had a ton of side effects where there were a ton of protocols that were just like, yo, we're shutting down because like we just never can get out of the bad debt we have. So yeah, in some sense, one version of the world is sort of what Zaki was intimating to, where there's like exception handling to particular types of events across bridges. The other is, which is like the kludgy kind of duct tape and baling wire thing, but you can do it faster. And the other is like, hey, we get everyone to use ZK. So what's your view on like, you know, in the 1 to 5 year time frame, how that changed for both of you?
I mean, I'm obviously really biased, but I think, hey, let's just all use ZK is obviously the correct thing. I think with exception handling, I don't know how you handle an exception where it's like, oh, now billions of dollars are gone. Like, sure, you can handle the exception, but the conclusion might still be the same, that, oh, our protocol is like completely done. Like, it doesn't really matter. And so I just am always like advocating for, let's add more layers of security and like make this stuff more secure, so that, because usually in the case of hacks, they are very catastrophic. And so it doesn't really matter if you handle the exception or not.
For sure. But there are things like halting particular markets in response to when the key signing stops happening. Like the threat response stuff is like actually still quite poor in some of these contracts because everyone is gas optimizing. So they're like, oh, no, we can't add this like extra hatch. And I my point is like, I think there is a lot of value in it. It's just not.
But if the hack can be atomic, then you're really screwed.
For sure. Like the Beanstalk hack, there's no way around that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Sure.
And I think there is actually a lot of value to, so I think there's arguments for it. I think there is a lot of value to atomic composability. So I do think it's kind of annoying to have a lot of this exception handling, because if you've ever like programmed in even like JavaScript where you have to like do this async await and then handle the exception with a try catch, it just all gets very ugly very quickly. So it is nice to assume, oh, things are fine. One thing I have thought about is like, what if you had a roll up where you could fraud proof certain exit conditions, like for example, oh, none of the protocols are hacked, and you kind of have atomic composability between all the apps in that domain, but then the domain itself has kind of like this optimistic challenge period or things like that. Like maybe that's interesting to think about as like a research exercise, but I think it's very tricky because often in DeFi, like the hacks happen and it's like in one transaction, all the money is gone. It's not this continuous strip. And there, it doesn't really help if you can pause the protocol, because by the time you can, it's done.
I think one thing that the multi-chain hack has been a great example of is the way in which the security of your system ends up being reduced to like your like largest or most dominant bridge, right? It doesn't matter that like Phantom is like consensus secure. The fact that like it's still like making blocks securely doesn't matter because like everybody lost all of their money because the bridge was what represented everyone, like all of the meaningful assets on chain.
I think the other thing I want to say about the multi-chain hack is like, security incident, as Tarun reminded me. Say you have a token that, you're bridging across a bunch of chains through like one bridge. I think that's really silly. And I think there really needs to be a standard for having like a cross-chain ERC20 or a cross-chain asset that you can be compatible with many different bridges, so that you're not kind of like paying, you're not kind of like a slave to any one bridge or any one like security model. And so I think that's like really important to make that a standard going forward, because my one worry is like, okay, multi-chain got hacked and now people are going to move to like having their assets secured by one other bridge that is equally susceptible, by the way, to the same security properties. And that's really dangerous for the ecosystem in general. Like, if that happens, like I think it's dangerous to crypto in general. So I think builders should just be really aware of like the security properties they're assuming. And then also I think as an industry or in the interop space, we should make this like more of a standard so that you're compatible to many different bridges. There's not vendor lock-in, because it is really hard to have good security properties of any one bridge.
And before Anna concludes, I want to say we normally don't have so much doomerism, like ZK security doomerism on the, or MPC or ZK. But this was an incident where it deserved to be talked about.
We have been talking about it actually before you arrived.
Oh, you talked about multi-chain?
No, we talked about ZK security.
Okay,
it's
cool,
definitely
cool.
a thing.
Yeah, that's definitely awesome.
I wish I could keep talking forever, but I think we all
forever
actually
is a long
have.
Time.
We all have true, but we also all have dinners, things we're supposed to go to. So I think it's a really good time to wrap. Thank you all for coming and doing this sort of the Paris EthCC week round up, sharing all the ideas and themes. Hopefully giving folks a bit of a sense for like what's been happening here, what the conversations were like. So yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
Cool. And I want to say a big thank you to the podcast team, Rachel, Henrik, and Tanya, and to our listeners. Thanks for listening.